She kept his calendar like she kept everything else in her life. Precisely. Without sentiment. With the kind of attention that looks, from the outside, like it costs nothing, and costs, from the inside, almost everything. Renata had been Piers Calloway's personal assistant for 4 years. For years of 7 a.m. briefings and last-minute flight changes, and board members who could not find their own reading glasses. For years of knowing, before he did, what mood he was in when he walked through the door. For years of being the most competent person in any room she entered and being mistaken, repeatedly, for the woman who ordered the coffee. She was 40 years old. She had stopped explaining what that meant to people who were not ready to understand it. The first time he said something that was not professional, she almost missed it. It was a Tuesday in late October. He had come back from a lunch meeting 20 minutes early, which meant the lunch had gone badly, which she already knew because she had gotten a text from his driver saying they left the restaurant before the entrees arrived. She had rearranged his 3 o'clock without being asked. She had placed a courte-deux on his desk, not the coffee he usually ordered, the courte-deux, which was what he actually wanted when he was irritated and too stubborn to admit it. He looked at the cup. Then he looked at her. "How do you do that?" he said. It wasn't a compliment. It was a genuine question. The kind people ask when something has surprised them so many times that the surprise has finally turned into something more like wonder. She said, "Do what?" He said, "No." She told him she paid attention. He said most people pay attention. She said most people pay attention to what they expect to see. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That's the most precise thing anyone has said to me all week. And I had a full calendar." She took the empty tray and left. She did not think about it for the rest of the day. She thought about it that night. Not obsessively. Just once, in the kitchen, while she was reheating something she had made on Sunday and no longer wanted. She stood at the counter and replayed the exchange the way you replay something that does not fit neatly into the category you were trying to put it in. It wasn't a compliment. She knew what those felt like. Men in positions of power had been complimenting her professionalism for 11 years in the specific tone that means, "You are useful, and I am gracious enough to acknowledge it." This was different. She put the plate in the microwave and told herself it wasn't different. The observations continued. Not aggressively. Not in the way that constitutes a pattern you can name out loud. Just present. A comment about the precision of her quarterly summaries that referenced a specific phrasing she had used and clearly remembered. A question, one afternoon when the office had emptied out, about whether she had read a particular article that had run in a financial journal, not because it was relevant to work, but because, he said, it had made him think of something she had said in a meeting 3 weeks ago. She had not read it. She read it that evening. She did not tell him. There is a specific kind of attention that is different from flattery. Flattery is about the person giving it. It is performance. It needs an audience and it needs a response, and underneath it there is always a need for approval, for effect, for the pleasant sensation of having made someone feel something. Attention is about the person receiving it. Real attention. The kind that says, "I was listening when you didn't know I was listening. I remembered what you said when there was no practical reason to remember it. I noticed the thing you didn't perform." Renata knew the difference. She had known the difference for a long time. And that was the problem. In February, 4 months into whatever this was that she was not calling anything, she made a mistake. It was small. In the context of everything she managed, it was genuinely minor. She had confirmed a dinner reservation under the wrong date and caught it herself 12 hours later and corrected it before it became a problem. She told him anyway, because she always told him. Because her integrity with him was the thing she was most certain of in a professional life full of uncertainties. He listened. Then he said, "Why are you telling me this?" It didn't become a problem. She said because it was her error and he should know. He looked at her for a moment. That particular look she had learned to recognize, the one that meant he was about to say something he had not pre-cleared. And he said, "Renata, the fact that you caught it and fixed it before it mattered is not a failure. That's what competence looks like. I don't need the confessional. I need you to stop punishing yourself for being human." She left his office without responding. She sat at her desk for 6 minutes before she trusted herself to answer an email. She was not falling for him. She said this to her friend Claudette on a Saturday morning in late February, in the way that you say things you are not certain of to people you trust to tell you the truth. Claudette had known her for 19 years. She stirred her coffee, and said nothing for long enough that the silence became its own response. Claudette, I didn't say anything. You made a face. I make faces. It's a character trait. Renata set her mug down. He's my employer. He's white. He's 46. He has a family name on the building he works in. He is the exact category of man that I spent my 30s learning to identify and leave alone. Claudette said, Okay. Okay what? Okay, you're not falling for him. She was falling for him. Not the way she had fallen for her ex-husband. Quickly, with the whole weight of herself, with a confidence she later understood had been partly youth and partly willful blindness. This was different. This was slower. This was the specific falling of someone who knows exactly what it costs and is watching themselves do it anyway, from a slight distance, with something that is not quite helplessness and not quite choice. She did not like it. She also did not stop it. The New York trip was in March. It was a client event, 2 days of meetings and a dinner at a restaurant that required a reservation made 4 months in advance. She had made the reservation. She had also managed the travel, the hotel, the presentation materials, the dietary requirements of 7 clients, and the fact that one of the board members who was supposed to attend had canceled 48 hours out and needed to be replaced with someone who could hold a conversation and had not yet offended the client in question. She had handled all of it. The first day passed in the clean, productive blur that she was good at. The meetings went well. The dinner went better than expected. She sat at the far end of the table and managed the logistics from there, the way she always did, visible enough to be useful and positioned just far enough outside the principal conversation to be invisible when she needed to be. Piers, across the table, caught her eye once. It was not a look that required interpretation. It was just held, for 1 second longer than professional. And then he looked away. The second evening, the dinner had ended. The clients had departed in their separate cars. The night was cold in the specific way that March in New York is cold. Not winter anymore, but not willing to admit it. They walked back toward the hotel. There was no particular reason they were walking together. There was also no particular reason they weren't. He said, Can I ask you something? She said yes, the way you say yes when you are not certain you mean it. He said, That conversation we had. In the office. The Friday before I left for London. She knew which conversation. She had known since he started the sentence. She said, What about it? He said, I keep coming back to the part where you didn't answer. She stopped walking. The street was quiet. A cab passed. Somewhere above them a window was lit, and someone was moving behind it, domestic and unaware. She said, Piers. He waited. She said, I am your personal assistant. I have worked for you for 4 years. I am 40 years old and I have already made the mistake of wanting something that was also convenient to want, and I am not. I am not going to do that again. She said it calmly, precisely, the way she did everything. He listened to all of it. Then he said, I know. A beat. I'm not asking you to make a mistake. She did not respond. They walked the rest of the way to the hotel. She took the elevator to her floor. He took his. The doors closed between them, and she stood in her room for a long time without turning on the lights. She was not shaking. She was something else. Something that did not have a clean name. She sat on the edge of the bed and thought about the specific weight of, I'm not asking you to make a mistake. Not, I have feelings for you. Not, give me a chance. Not, you're being irrational. Just that. She was back in Chicago by Wednesday. She resumed her life with the precision she always resumed it with. 7 a.m. The briefings. The calendar. The core to do when it was needed and the space when that was needed instead. He did not press. This, the not pressing, was the thing she had not expected. She had a history with men who did not take no as a complete answer. Men who reframed rejection as a process. Men who confused persistence with passion and called it romance. Piers did none of that. He was simply present, unchanged, treating her with the same quality of attention he had always treated her with, which meant she could not dismiss it as a campaign. It was not a campaign. It was just him, and the continuity of it was, somehow, more destabilizing than pressure would have been. 3 weeks after New York, she arrived at the office to find a book on her desk. No note, no explanation, just the book. She knew what it was before she picked it up. She had mentioned it once, in passing, in a conversation that had lasted approximately 45 seconds, for months earlier. She had said she had been meaning to read it. She had not said it to him specifically. She had said it to the air, The way you say things you are not actually certain anyone is listening to. He had been listening. She held the book for a long time. Then she put it in her bag and sat down and opened her calendar and began her day. She read it in a weekend. She did not tell him. But on the Monday morning, when she placed his briefing documents on his desk and turned to leave, she stopped. She turned back. She said, "It was good." He looked up. She said, "The book." He said nothing. He just looked at her in that way, the specific way, the one that saw her, and nodded once. She left. It was the most she had given him in 3 weeks. It was, she understood, also the most she had given herself. If you are watching this and you have ever been the most capable person in a room that did not fully see you, this part is for you. Because what happened next was not what you might expect. It was not a grand gesture. It was not a declaration. It was not the moment the CEO realizes his feelings and everything rearranges around him. Actually, stop what you're doing for a second. Because this is where the story stops being about them and starts being about something you have probably lived through yourself. There is a particular arithmetic that women, and specifically Black women, do before they allow themselves to want something. It is not conscious, always, but it is always present. It goes like this: how much will this cost me? Not emotionally, structurally, professionally. What is the story that gets told about me if this goes wrong? What is the story that gets told about me if it goes right? Who gets to be naive in this situation, and who gets to be calculating? Who gets to be in love, and who gets to be ambitious? Renata had done this arithmetic since she was in her 20s. She had done it so many times that it had become something she did not even recognize as a choice anymore. It was just the terrain, the landscape of her professional and personal life, invisible as weather. She had not resented it. You do not resent weather. But somewhere in the weeks after New York, she began to notice the arithmetic was running. And for the first time in a very long time, she looked at it directly. She did not make a decision. I want to be precise about this, because the story wants you to believe that what follows is a decision, a pivot, a moment where she chose. It wasn't. What it was, and this is the harder, more honest version, was a lessening of the habit of refusal. Not because she had decided he was worth it. Not because she had resolved the arithmetic. Not because she trusted the situation or trusted herself in it. But because she had spent so long treating her own desire as a liability that she had stopped being able to distinguish between self-protection and self-erasure. And one evening in April, standing at her kitchen counter with a glass of wine she had not fully wanted, she thought, "I am 40 years old, and I have protected myself into a very small life." She did not finish the wine. She went to bed. She slept better than she had in weeks. In May she told him, not everything, not the arithmetic, not the conversations with Claudette, not the weekend she had spent reading his book and not telling him she had read it, and then telling him anyway. She told him this, that she had been thinking about what he said in New York, that she did not know what she wanted, that she was not in the habit of not knowing what she wanted, that she found the not knowing uncomfortable and specific, and she paused here for a moment, not entirely unwelcome. He listened to all of it. Then he said, "What do you need from me?" She had not expected that question. She had expected, she did not know what she had expected. Something that required her to manage it. Something she could file under a category she already had. She said, "I don't know yet." He said, "Okay, just that. Okay." What followed was not a romance in the way that word usually functions in stories like this. It was slower. It was more ordinary. It was two people who had spent months in each other's orbit beginning, carefully, to recalibrate the distance between them, not collapsing it, not performing the collapse of it, just adjusting. A lunch that was not a working lunch, though they talked about work. A walk after a late meeting that neither of them named as anything. A conversation one evening, in his office with the city visible through the window, where he told her something about his family that he had not told people who had known him for decades, and she received it the way she received everything. Precisely, without performing a reaction, which meant her actual reaction, when it came, was genuine and therefore rare. She told him, that same evening, about the apartment. The smaller one. The one she had moved into after the divorce that she had not told her mother was smaller. He did not say he was sorry. He said, "Do you like it now?" She thought about it honestly. She said, "Yes, more than I expected to." He said, "That's something." She said, "It is." The office noticed. Not because anything was obvious. Nothing was obvious. Renata did not do obvious. But there is a specific quality of attention between two people that shifts the air in a room. Not dramatically, not in a way anyone can name, just perceptibly. The junior assistant, a young woman named Brielle, said to another junior staff member in the break room, in a voice she believed was quiet, "Something's different." The other junior staff member said, "With what?" Brielle said, "I don't know. Just the energy." In June, a board member named Hargrave, a man in his 60s who had been with the firm since before Piers had formally taken the helm, called Renata into a side room after a meeting. He closed the door. He said, pleasantly, in the voice of a man who has spent decades performing pleasantness, "I hope you understand the position you're in." She looked at him. He said, "Piers is a Callaway. This firm has a reputation. I'm sure you know what I mean." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she said, "I do. I know exactly what you mean." She opened the door and left. She did not tell Piers. She told Claudette. Claudette, on the phone, was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Are you okay?" Renata said, "I am angry." "Good. I am angry in a very specific way." "Tell me." "I am angry," Renata said, "because he said it like it was a warning. And I am angry because part of me received it like one. And I am angry because that part, is the part that has been running that arithmetic my entire adult life, and I am 40 years old, and I am so tired of doing math that nobody asked me to do." Claudette was quiet. Then she said, "So stop." She did not stop. You don't stop in a moment. You don't dismantle arithmetic you have been running for 20 years because you have a phone call on a Tuesday in June. But something shifted. Again, the way things had been shifting, slowly and without announcement, for months. I want to tell you what happened. I also want to be honest about what I don't know. What I know, Renata did not leave the firm. She did not have a scene with Hargrave. She did not make a declaration to Piers that resolved everything into clarity. What I know, Piers, 3 weeks after the June conversation she did not tell him about, restructured her role. Not a title change. A functional restructuring. The kind that meant she was no longer simply his PA, but the operational lead on 3 firm-wide processes that she had been quietly managing anyway. He did not present it as a gift. He presented it as what it was, recognition of work she had already been doing. She accepted it the same way. What I know, the evening after the restructuring was announced, they had dinner. Not in a restaurant that required a 4-month reservation. In a small place in the West Loop that she had recommended for a client dinner 8 months ago, and he had apparently remembered. They talked for 3 hours. At one point he said, "I should have done that 2 years ago." She said, "The dinner?" He said, "The role." She looked at him. She said, "Yes, you should have." He said, "I know." This is the moment you might expect things to resolve. The dinner. The acknowledgement. The role. The city visible through the restaurant window. The wine. The 3 hours that went somewhere neither of them had fully mapped. But here is the thing about resolution. It is not a destination. It is not a moment. It is not the scene where everything that was complicated becomes simple. Renata knew this. She had known it since the marriage. She had known it the way you know things that have cost you something real. What she arrived at, not that evening, but in the weeks that followed, gradually, the way dawn arrives, was not resolution. It was something quieter. A decision to stop treating her own life as a problem to be managed. A decision, not about Piers, not about the firm, not about Hargrave or the arithmetic or the smaller apartment, to be present in the wanting of something without immediately calculating the cost. That is not nothing. For some people, it is the hardest thing there is. Actually, I need you to sit with that for a second. Because the version of this story that most people tell ends differently. It ends with the couple, or the departure, or the confrontation. It ends with a clear moral delivered cleanly. This story does not end there. The watch-through reward, the thing I held back until now, is this. The most significant thing Piers did was not the book. It was not the restructuring. It was not the dinner. It was the not pressing. Because the specific harm that Renata had spent her adult life navigating, the arithmetic, the positions, the Hargraves, was not dramatic. It was not a single villain or a single wound. It was the accumulation of 1,000 small moments in which she had been asked, implicitly or explicitly, to calculate before she could feel. And Piers, imperfectly, incompletely, with all of his blind spots and his family name on the building and his 46 years of never having had to do the arithmetic himself, Piers gave her space. Not because he was noble, not because he had figured something out, because he was paying attention. And sometimes, not always, not reliably, not as a guarantee, attention is the thing. If you know someone who is running arithmetic they were never supposed to be doing, someone who has spent so long protecting themselves that they have stopped being able to tell the difference between caution and disappearance, send them this. Not with a message, not with an explanation. Just send it. They'll know why. The last thing I want to say is this. Renata is 40 years old. I keep saying that because the story keeps treating it as a complication. Something to be overcome or justified or explained. It isn't. 40 is not the version of yourself before you figured things out. 40 is not the deadline. 40 is not the consolation prize. 40 is the first age at which some people finally stop apologizing for the size of their own wanting. Renata got there. She got there in a small restaurant in the West Loop on a Thursday evening in August with a man she had not expected and a title she had earned in a life that was, for the first time in a very long time, approximately the size it should have been all along. She did not get everything she wanted, but she stopped pretending she did not want it. And if you have made it this far, I think you already know this story was never really about her boss. The comment I can already see someone typing right now. She should have left the firm. You can't date your employer. This was always going to be a power imbalance. I thought that too. I spent a long time in that argument. And then I realized the power imbalance was not created by the attraction. It was there before the attraction. It was there before Piers noticed her. It was there before she took the job. The question the story is actually asking is not, should she have wanted this? The question is, who gets to decide which desires are professional liabilities, and whose desires never have to be? I don't have a clean answer. I suspect you don't either. Drop it in the comments. If you are someone who takes your emotional life seriously enough to go further than the surface version of a story, this channel is for you. We do not tie things up cleanly here. We go where the story actually goes. Subscribe if that's what you're looking for. Save this one. Not because of the ending. Because of the moment you recognize something. You'll know which moment. The next story I'm working on is about a woman who stayed in a marriage for 11 years because she confused familiarity with safety, and the one conversation that finally made the difference visible. It connects to something in this story that I deliberately left unresolved. You'll see it when you watch it. There is a question I keep coming back to. I have not resolved it. I am not going to. Piers gave Renata space. And the space was good. And the space was necessary. And the space was also, let me be precise here, easier for him to give than it would have been for someone who had more to lose by waiting. I keep thinking about that. About the difference between generosity and the specific luxury of being able to afford generosity. I don't know what to do with that thought. Maybe you do. She kept his calendar like she kept everything else in her life. Precisely. Without sentiment. She still does. But it is not the same calendar it was. And she is not the same woman. And the cost of that, the real cost, not the arithmetic, but the actual weight of becoming someone who allows themselves to be seen. That is the part nobody puts in the story. That's the part that was always the story.